Hi, this is Maggie from Design Code Debug Repeat. Welcome to the channel. If you're here because you want to learn to program in Java, you're in the right place. This is the 20th video in the Introductory Programming in Java full course, and the third video of Lesson 4, Looping Structures in Java. So far, we have introduced the while loop, some basic looping concepts, and we've looked at some common looping patterns, such as adding values encountered in a loop, finding the best fit value, and looping until a sentinel value is reached. In this video, I'm going to show you a different looping structure in Java, the do-while, and we'll discuss when this structure is a good choice and how to structure a loop with a while versus a do-while. Let's get right into it. You can do all the looping you will ever need to do with a while loop, which is why I introduce it first when I'm teaching any programming language. Similar to an if statement, it's all you need, although with conditional code, the switch statement and the ternary or conditional operator can be very convenient and sometimes can make code easier to read, which is an important goal. Let's return to a program that I said we could program another way that might be better, and that's the simple quiz loop program. This program asks the user the answer to a quiz question until they give the right answer. So the loop control variable is the answer given by the user stored in the variable answer. And our loop header is while answer is not equal to C. But to execute that test the first time, before we go into the loop, pose the question, and obtain an answer from the user, we have to set answer to a dummy value, anything but C, so we go into the loop. So I set it to X. I'm going to rewrite this using a different loop structure in Java, the do-while loop. Now, a while loop, what we have right now, is a pretest loop. That means that we test before the loop body. A do-while loop is a posttest loop, meaning we test after the loop body. So to change this, I'm going to select while answer is not equal to C, and cut it, and put it after the closing curly brace. And I'll put a semicolon after the condition because that's the end of the loop. And at the top, before the opening curly brace, I'll put the keyword do. Okay, so why might we do this? A do-while loop always executes the loop body once. So we create the scanner, and I'm going to change line 9, so it's simply char answer. We no longer need to give that an initial value. And then we reach the do sequentially, and we go right in and start executing the loop body code. So we pose the question, get the user's answer, and provide feedback. Then, after the end of the loop body, we do the test. If the user answered C, then the test will be false, and we'll proceed to the first line of code after the loop. But if the user didn't answer C, the test will be true, and we go back up to the top of the loop, the do. This is just like a while loop, except the test is at the end, meaning the loop body always executes once. I'll run the program and give some wrong answers and then see, and you'll see it executes the same as the version with the while. So again, we could certainly do this with a while. We did. Many languages don't have a post-test loop structure. At this time, Python doesn't, for example. But if you have the post-test loop available to you, it's an excellent choice when you know that the loop body needs to execute at least once. You can see it makes perfect sense here. Ask the user the question first, get their answer, and then check to see if it was correct, so we can decide whether to ask again or continue on with the next line of the program after the loop. Now, let's look at another situation in which we might use a do-while loop, and that's with input validation. I have an example here called validateAge.java. Input validation means checking if the input falls within a valid range of values, and with an input validation loop, it means not allowing the user to proceed past entering input until they've provided a valid value. That way, the rest of the system won't process garbage input. You've probably been asked to enter a password for a site, and after entering your password, learned it didn't include letters and numbers, or it wasn't long enough, or whatever other criteria the site has. You can't proceed until your password follows the rules. I'm sure you've had that experience. A do-while is a natural choice for input validation because you must obtain the input before you can validate it. So here you can see on line 17, the keyword do, followed by the loop body. We simply ask the user for the input, in this case, their age, and then read it in. And then on line 20, while age is less than 1 or age is greater than 120. I'll run this, and I'll enter some invalid input. I'll enter 0, and it prompts me again 121, and it prompts me again, and finally I'll enter 60. It then prints my age. You can see the print statement is after the loop. It only prints once the user has provided a valid input. Now we can improve this slightly, but before we do, let's go over the logic and the flow of control. With a do while, a post-test loop, we execute the loop body first. That was the first time the program prompted us for an age, and we provided it. And then we reach the test. If the test is true, we go back up to line 17, the do, and go into the loop again. With an input validation loop, the test is true when the input is invalid. Once the user enters valid input, we want to proceed with the rest of the program. But if the input is invalid, we're going to require the user to enter it again. So the condition on line 20 is the condition for invalid input. Now you might find it easier to write a condition for valid input. You can see I have that in the assert statement on line 22. Valid input is an age between 1 and 120. Now I arbitrarily picked those ages. Maybe you want to give a higher age than 120, or maybe you want to use doubles, but here I chose integers between 1 and 120. And a valid age is within the range 1 to 120 inclusive, which I've written as age greater than or equal to 1 and age less than or equal to 120. So the opposite or complement of that is the loop entry condition, age less than 1 or age greater than 120. If you don't remember how to complement a logical expression, you use De Morgan's theorem. I'll link a video on that for your review. When you're writing an input validation loop, it might seem obvious, but it's critical that you know what a valid range of inputs is. This should be in the specification of the problem you're solving, and if it isn't, talk to the client. You must be able to define that with logic, as I've done in the assert, and then complement it for your loop entry condition. Okay, and how can we improve this? Well, notice in the output, it keeps asking me for my age, but it doesn't tell me why. A user might find that frustrating. So this would be better if we gave the user an error message. The error message would have to be in the loop after the user has provided input. So I could add after line 19, if age less than 1 or age greater than 120, so our loop entry condition, the condition describing bad input. And then system out print line, please enter a value between 1 and 120. That tells the user why they're about to be asked again. So notice a disadvantage here. We have to have an if statement inside the loop if we want to do something if the input just provided was invalid, like print an error message. That's because the first time through the loop, they won't have given us bad input, so we can't always put it in there. I want to show you how to structure this same loop with a pretest loop. A post-test loop is a good choice. There are disadvantages to both loops for input validation. This is validateAgePretest.java. To write an input validation loop as a pretest loop, we first obtain the input on lines 17 and 18. We then test for invalid input. This is the same test as in our other loop. And if it's invalid, we go into this loop. So I can write the error message on line 20, please enter an age between 1 and 120, and then obtain the age again. So in a pretest loop, we have two places where we obtain the age. The first place is called a priming read. That's where we first put a value in the variable age. But then, in the loop, we're only there if they gave us invalid input in the priming read, or a second time or third time in the loop. So we can print the error message. We're only in there if there's an error in the input. And then we get the input again. That's the updater for the loop. If we don't read in that input again, we'll have an infinite loop. It's the input variable that's controlling this loop. So they're really similar. I'd say the disadvantage to the post-test loop is you need an if statement in the loop if you want to print an error message, and the disadvantage to the pretest loop is you need the priming read and then a read again in the loop, so there's some duplication. Now I hope this is useful to you and interesting and not too confusing. Pretest and post-test loops are basically the same, except a post-test loop body always executes at least once, and a pretest loop body might not execute if the loop entry condition is false the first time the loop is encountered in execution. I'd recommend predicting how these loops will execute for different inputs, and then stepping through in the debugger to confirm your predictions. And as usual, I have included some auto-graded exercises in the description of this video so you can practice with the video code. and the code has been uploaded to my GitHub repository. When you're feeling confident with the concepts in this video, you're ready to move on. As always, have fun and keep coding.